Number 1.
Lindy had spent that Friday doing what she loved. She'd been tying large ribbons to bunches of poinsettias, getting ready for Christmas in the florist where she worked. Just a few hours later, the young woman would be brutally murdered in her apartment, making her case one of the most frustrating mysteries in true crime history. Lindy and Phil had married just 15 months earlier in October 1974. They were about to move to a new home, as Lindy was desperate to get a dog and Phil wanted more space to create his artwork at home. 19-year-old Lindy had been at Landis Flowers and Gifts for around 6 months and adored working at the florist. She got on well with the owner, Bob, and had a real eye for creating beautiful bouquets, which got her out of doing the administration role she'd originally been employed to do. At 5:15 p.m. on the 5th of December 1975, Lindy left work and drove from the florist to Phil's workplace at Hertz Rent-A-Car. He was working at the rental place while studying art at Millersville University to pay the bills, and that's why Lindy was visiting him. Paycheck in hand, she headed to the Commonwealth National Bank to pay in the check, and from there she went to John Herr's Village Market. She bought 4 bags of shopping and drove home to Spring Manor Apartments, arriving around 6:30 p.m. Lindy was found by her aunt and uncle a little while later. The door to her apartment was open and Lindy was on the floor in a pool of blood. The coroner later reported that she'd been stabbed with a large knife 11 times, and many of the wounds were to her neck. She'd fought her attacker hard until the end, but the only evidence in the apartment was a man's footprint and a drop of blood that they weren't sure belonged to Lindy. Phil was devastated, as was anyone who knew the vibrant young woman. No one could understand who would have done something so vicious to their Lindy. There's a lot of possibilities I've played in my mind. Maybe some kind of psycho or weirdo got in there. But I think one thing we can make absolutely cement is that it was someone both of us knew, Phil Biechler in Intelligencer Journal. The investigation by Manor Township Police Department began quickly and started with Lindy's friends and family. From the beginning, the police knew that Lindy had a stalker. One of her family members told investigators that Lindy thought she was being watched and followed by a man, but they knew nothing more than that. Over the next few weeks, police asked the public for help while investigating the people around the victim. Lindy's boss Bob Aumont and her husband Phil were questioned about their whereabouts the night Lindy was killed and were asked to take a polygraph test to rule them out of the inquiry. Meanwhile, they also asked witnesses to come forward if they owned a dark-colored American-made car, as it was reportedly double-parked outside the Spring Manor Apartments that night. Fairly early in the investigation, state police were brought in to help with the case. Between the two forces, they interviewed over 300 people, including those who barely knew Lindy, in the hope of finding a lead. The investigation continued, but with little to go out, the police were chasing their tails. It wasn't until December 1976, a year later, that the biggest clue arrived in the post. Lindy's gravestone had been vandalized and painted with red paint. No one knew who was responsible, but one person was willing to own up to the crimes. Marked urgent, the letter arrived at the Manor Township Police Department and was addressed to Chief Sheeler. The letter read, "Hi Sheeler, just eats up your heart knowing you haven't caught me yet. Still around. Lindy's marker on her grave just turned me on like she did, and the way she looked all bloody, like the paint on her marker, the scratch and nick marks represent the knife stabs. Count them." You wondered if the guy at the gas station in Mountville were related to Biechler's murder. Forget it, man, no way. I'll tell you what, Chief Pig, you print this letter in the paper along with a picture in Friday night's Lancaster paper and Saturday morning's paper, and I might confess when I get off my trip. You see, the world owes me a living, maybe I give you a few hints who I am. Got busted once for drugs a few years back. Live in West End of Lancaster suburbs. I am 5'10" tall, 205 lbs, fat and beautiful, and capable of killing again without knowing it. December 5, 1975 was under the stupor of amphetamines like right now. Well-educated man in the community, single, good job, but God please Chief help me, I am losing my mind, help me, before I kill again. The headaches kill me every time it aches, the drugs only calm it temporarily. Will God forgive me? Please print this, Chief, in the paper, so I know you got it. Then I write you again, God, I need a priest, what have I done? Help me please. P.S. Chief Sheeler, my friend, has confessed to the killing of Lindy Sue Biechler. As God is my witness, do as he asks. Print this letter on the front page. I am not aware of his intentions right now, but contemplating murder is not his intentions. He is mentally sick. When the letter appears, then he will turn himself in. He described the relationship he and Lindy had before he killed her. He only realizes it now. When you're on drugs, you're not responsible for your actions. Please, he is asleep now. That's why I finished the letter. All I can tell you, my friend frequents Manor Shopping Center in the evenings and the fields around it. Mostly weeknights. He will contact you very soon, and oh, when he does, please bring a Catholic priest to the police station. Janice Crum. The police weren't convinced the letter was real. There was little detail included in the contents, and what was included had been reported in newspapers following her death. Despite being told to print the letter, the note wasn't published until December 2000, when investigators thought someone may come forward, recognizing the writing. In April 1989, forensic testing was carried out on the blood spot found at the crime scene. Technology had begun to advance, but when it came time to test the sample, the equipment wasn't good enough to analyze the blood. The years continued with still no word of a break in the case. The new millennium arrived and still, police were no closer to solving the, now, 25-year-old mystery. In June 2006, Lindy's case was chosen by the Vidic Society for inclusion in their program. The group of 50 volunteer top forensic scientists, psychologists and other members of law enforcement came together to look at Lindy's case in more detail. When you have a case that you've worked diligently for years and you think you've exhausted most of your leads, the perfect mechanism to have is a group of people like this. Chief County Detective Michael Landis in Lancaster, New Era. The problem was that they didn't find anything new, and despite the expertise within the society, the case remained cold. In December 2007, Lindy's brother Michael contacted another murder victim's brother. 25-year-old schoolteacher Christy Mirak was raped and beaten to death in her home on the 21st of December 1992. There was no motive or suspects in her case, and her brother Vince was frustrated at the progress, so he agreed to work with Michael to bring the case to the forefront of people's minds once again. The brothers rented a billboard along Route 30 and placed an image of their two murdered sisters on it. The image that was included on the billboard and in newspapers via newspapers.com billboard faced east and caught the attention of thousands of motorists. They hoped that someone would have information about their sisters' deaths, but no one came forward. I think a lot of things were botched and a lot of things were overlooked from the start. Phil Biechler speaking to LNP Always Lancaster in July 2018. The case was all but forgotten by everyone apart from the families, but in January 2019, something remarkable happened. A killer was caught. The local DJ admitted to Christy Mirak's rape and murder after being linked by DNA. His sister had used a genealogy website to trace their ancestry, which in turn matched in part with the DNA found on Christy. Raymond Rowe pleaded guilty 27 years after the murder. The 49-year-old had built up a following on social media due to his music and had continued his life for over a quarter of a century. He now resides in Waymart Correctional Facility in Pennsylvania, where he's likely to stay for the rest of his life. Though this didn't help Lindy's case directly, it showed how far genealogy profiling had come in the past few years, and later in 2019, 2 composites of Lindy's murderer were released to the public. The images created by Parabone Nanolabs show the killer at 2 different ages and how he would have aged over the years, from 25 to 65. Lancaster County District Attorney Craig Stedman said, "A snapshot might trigger something for somebody. We don't need much here. We just need something." Lindy's killer may well be dead by now, but hopefully, the images will help nudge a hidden memory for someone in the Lancaster area. Phil Biechler finished college, went on to the University of Delaware, where he continued his study in fine arts and sculpture. He eventually remarried in 1990 and had a daughter. He's now a metal fabricator and creates his own stunning metalwork pieces. Lindy's case is still open, and information can be provided by calling the DA's office on 717 299 8100 or the Manor Township Police at 717 299 8100.
Number 2.
Robin Lynn Farnsworth was born on September 11, 1979. At just 14 years old, she gave birth to her daughter, Samantha, in 1994. Robin lived in Bald Knob, Arkansas, and attended Bald Knob High School. On January 27, 1995, Robin, 15, left home for school that morning. She appeared happy, and nothing was wrong, said her mother, Kathy, in 2004. But Robin never came home. 4 days later, Kathy called the police to report her missing daughter. Then, on March 8, 1995, a classmate of Robin's, Kenyatta Haynes, 18, vanished after leaving school at 2:20 p.m. Kenyatta was a cheerleader and popular student at Bald Knob High School. Police were notified when she failed to show up for cheerleading practice. 2 days after Kenyatta disappeared, searchers found her partially clothed body submerged in a creek in a wooded area near the local country club. The area was known as a lover's lane and party hangout for local teenagers. Kenyatta had been handcuffed and beaten. Early reports say she had been stabbed multiple times, and authorities stated then that it did not appear she had been raped. Ligature marks surrounded her neck. Rocks were put in her clothing and tied around her waist before her body was placed in the creek. The day after Kenyatta's body was found, police arrested James Derrick Grubbs, 17, and Donnie Ray Temple, 18. Both lived in Bald Knob and attended school with Kenyatta and Robin. Despite what the local media reported concerning the murder details, Temple told a slightly different story. He said that Grubbs had picked him up for school on March 8. Although bound and lying on the floor of Grubbs' truck, Kenyatta was still alive. Temple said Grubbs had raped her. Then, Temple witnessed Grubbs strike Kenyatta with a shovel in the woods, killing her. Grubbs ordered Temple to help stuff her clothes with rocks to sink her body in the creek. It's unclear what prompted Grubbs to commit such a heinous act. He and Kenyatta shared a locker and ate at the same lunch table. The killer teen was headed for college and on the right path to a promising future for himself. Temple and Grubbs became friends while working together at the Bald Knob Piggly Wiggly store. Robin's boyfriend also worked at the store, and he and Grubbs were friends who had searched for Robin together. Authorities did not initially link the two crimes together. Bald Knob police had labeled Robin's disappearance a runaway case. She was an at-risk teenager who had once run away from home. That was why her mother waited a few days before notifying the authorities. She figured Robin would eventually return. On April 4, 1995, while awaiting trial, Temple told a jailer that months earlier before Kenyatta's death, Grubbs had shown him the badly beaten body of Robin Farnsworth hidden under a pile of newspapers in an old barn near Russell, outside White County. There, they found a large area with evidence of decomposition in a patch of ground under a cedar tree. They also discovered a purple fingernail, a few finger bones, and buttons from pants and some dirt, but did not find a body. Odom informed Robin's mother what Temple had told him, but she insisted her daughter was still alive after reportedly seeing Robin after the boys' arrests. Both the police and Bald Knob community reacted differently to Kenyatta's disappearance because of her family background and status in high school. Her disappearance horrified the community, and dozens of people volunteered to help search for the cheerleader. Yet, no one searched for Robin, and very few people knew of her disappearance. According to the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, laws enacted in 1985 for children and 2001 for adults require law enforcement to enter missing persons reports into state and national databases immediately, even if the child left home voluntarily. However, Bald Knob police failed to give Robin's missing person report to state and federal authorities. Former White County Sheriff Jess Odom said in 2009 that he asked the Bald Knob police chief in 1995 about Robin's case possibly being connected to Kenyatta's. The chief responded that Robin was just a runaway. Odom dropped the discussion and refocused his attention on Kenyatta's murder. On December 28, 1997, deer hunter Johnny Johnson found human remains in the woods near Russell, 100 yards away from where Temple said Grubbs disposed of Robin's body. It was a human skull with no jawbone sitting on top of the ground. There was a red sweater with tassels that barely had dirt over it. And you could see some fingernails laying in the dirt that were painted purple, Johnson told the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette in 2009. He also clearly remembered seeing a pair of brown penny loafers. They were itty-bitty shoes, he recalled. A size 4 or 5. I thought it was a kid's when I found them. Someone from the White County Sheriff's Department told Johnson the remains were likely Robin's. However, a few days later, he read in a local newspaper that White County detectives were unsure if the remains were animal or human. Investigators later confirmed the remains as human, but believed they belonged to another missing girl from another county. When Odom left office in 2000, the bones remained unidentified in the state crime lab, and Robin's mother remained unconvinced they were her daughters. In 2004, White County had a new sheriff, Pat Garrett, who succeeded Odom in 2000. At a press conference that year, Garrett claimed the box containing the skeletal remains was shelved and forgotten about until March 2003 when he found them. He immediately sent them to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia, to be tested. Lab technicians told Garrett it could take anywhere from 1 year to 10 years before receiving results. Garrett said the FBI lab was backlogged with DNA evidence from the September 11 attacks and the war in Iraq. However, the results returned a few weeks later, and the remains were identified as Robin Farnsworth. In 2009, Odom countered Garrett's statement about the remains. He said he immediately had the remains sent to the FBI crime lab when they were found and contacted Robin's dentist, hoping to identify the remains through dental records. However, Robin's records did not include X-rays because she was pregnant with Samantha at her last appointment. The Democrat-Gazette reported in 2009 that crime lab records indicated that the remains were examined on December 30, 1997, 2 days after Johnson discovered them. A worker at the state's medical examiner's office said his records showed that the lab released the remains to White County Detective Fred Cheek on March 11, 2003. Garrett walked back on his 2004 claim and said he had inaccurate information when he held the press conference. He further stated he did not realize Cheek had checked the bones out of the lab and placed them in the evidence room, the Gazette-Democrat reported. Grubbs and Temple were eventually convicted of Kenyatta's murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. However, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that sentencing a person to life in prison with no chance at parole for a crime committed as a minor is cruel and unusual punishment. Soon after, Arkansas eliminated life without parole for juveniles. Ark. SB 294 states that juveniles convicted of capital murder are subject to a life sentence with the possibility of parole after a minimum of 30 years. Grubbs was only 17 at the time of Kenyatta's murder. In October 2018, a judge resentenced him to life in prison with parole eligibility after 30 years. At the time of the resentencing, he had already served 23 years, so he only had 7 years of his sentence remaining. Temple was 18, so his original sentence did not change. Detective Heather Meadows of the White County Sheriff's Department took over Robin's case and believes Grubbs and Temple killed Robin. Circumstantial evidence links the cases together, but Meadows said the case lacks physical, tangible evidence. Robin's case has gone cold. Grubbs remains in prison as of this writing. Since his time there, he has received his GED and completed anger and stress management classes and a substance abuse program. He has never admitted to killing Robin or shown remorse for killing Kenyatta. Temple is currently at Ouachita River Correctional Unit. Since his incarceration, he has committed 2 major disciplinary violations: sexual activity and failure to obey order. He also has completed stress management courses. As of 2009, Robin's mother did not think Grubbs and Temple killed her daughter and still believed she saw Robin after their arrest. In May 2021, Bald Knob Mayor Barth Grayson proclaimed May 3 Kenyatta Haynes Day and said it would be annually. The Daily Citizen stated, Council member Johnny Hodges presented Haynes' mother, Dorothy Haynes Rogers, with a framed printing plate of a memorial front page of the city's former newspaper, the Bald Knob Banner. It was dated March 16, 1995. The family also was presented with flowers. Furthermore, A $1,000 scholarship in Kenyatta's name is presented to a senior at Bald Knob High School accepted into a bachelor's program in a mental health field. Furthermore, a $1,000 scholarship in Kenyatta's name is presented to a senior at Bald Knob High School accepted into a bachelor's program in a mental health field. Meanwhile, the town seems to have forgotten Robin Farnsworth. Robin's case is officially unsolved. Anyone with information should call the White County Sheriff's Department 501-279-6279.
Number 3.
On June 24, 2005, the Tinsley family held a press conference at the Allen County Courthouse in Fort Wayne, Indiana, during which they appealed for information from the public about an unsolved murder. The Tinsleys were requesting any leads from the public about the murder of their daughter April, who had been 8 years old at that time. She'd been reported missing in April 1988, and her body was discovered several days later. The young girl had been raped and strangled to death. Despite a thorough police investigation and a reward offered for information, April's killer managed to evade justice. Several years later, a message appeared on a barn that was allegedly written by the killer, who appeared to be taunting police and their inability to catch him. It soon became the Midwestern state's most notorious unsolved murder case. Almost 30 years later, more advanced techniques were employed to discover his identity. By May 2018, it was announced an arrest had been made in the case. A 59-year-old Indiana resident, who was charged with the murder of April Tinsley, had been apprehended through the use of forensic genealogy. The killer's own DNA, left at the crime scene, had sealed his fate. April Marie Tinsley was born on March 18, 1980, to Janet and Michael Tinsley, and the family resided in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The young girl attended Fairfield Elementary School and was a member of the children's choir at the Faith United Methodist Church. Not long after her 8th birthday, April went out playing with two of her friends. On that day, April 1, 1988, a Good Friday, April left her friend's house to retrieve her umbrella. The time was about 3 p.m., and when she failed to return home that night, her frantic mother contacted police and reported her daughter as missing. A search for the young girl began almost immediately and consisted of some 250 Fort Wayne police officers and 50 local volunteers. Nothing was found during this extensive search. Several days later, a witness came forward and reported seeing a white man in his 30s had yelled at a girl believed to be Tinsley before forcing her into what was described as a blue pickup truck. In the meantime, the girl's mother Janet waited, hoping that police would bring home her daughter. Then 3 days after she went missing, they received the news that every parent dreads. On April 5, 1988, the body of April Tinsley was found in a ditch just west of Spencerville, Indiana. Her body had been found by a jogger passing the rural DeKalb County farmland, located just 20 miles from her home. Near to the crime scene, investigators found one of April's shoes, as well as a shopping bag containing a sex toy. It was determined during the autopsy that the young girl had been raped and strangled. The pathologist estimated she had been dead for about 1 or 2 days before she was discovered and that her body had been placed in the ditch some 4 hours before it was found. A motorist later came forward and reported seeing a blue pickup truck near the site where April's body was found. Early investigations led police to a 34-year-old suspect who was arrested on suspicion of murder. However, after further inquiries, it was determined this man was not involved in April Tinsley's murder, but authorities did charge him with child molestation in a separate case, of which he was acquitted the following month. Shortly after the murder, police released a composite sketch of the suspect based on the account of the witness who reported seeing Tinsley's kidnapper. On the same day her remains were found, 2 local radio stations established a reward fund, along with additional funds that were arranged to cover the costs for April's burial and for her family. 3 days later, a memorial service was held at the Faith United Methodist Church, and April was buried in the Greenlawn Memorial Park. In response to the death of April Tinsley, 90 members of the Fort Wayne community formed on April 20, 1988, the volunteer group April, Associated Parents Regional Independent League, or later Abduction Prevention Reconnaissance and Information League, to help police solve cases involving missing children. On April 26, 1988, police sent DNA samples of Tinsley and 5 suspects to a private lab in Germantown, Maryland for profiling, giving inconclusive results. Without a prime suspect, the case grew cold, and detectives eventually began working other crimes as leads in the case fizzled out. Then, just over 2 years after the kidnapping and murder of April Tinsley, there was development in the case. On May 21, 1990, Fort Wayne police officers found a message on a St. Joseph Township barn. The message, which read, "I kill 8-year-old April M. Tinsley, and did you find the other shoe, haha, I will kill again," was written with crayons which were found near the barn. Several months after this discovery, the body of another child was found, and investigators suspected there could be a link between this latest crime and the murder of April Tinsley. 7-year-old Sarah Jean Biechler disappeared on June 13, 1990 from her family's Fort Wayne apartment complex. Her body was found in a nearby grassy creek the next day. She had been molested and suffocated. In April 1991, a homicide team was formed by local and state police to investigate Tinsley and Biechler's cases. 4 years later, investigators were of the opinion that both murder cases, that of April Tinsley and Sarah Jean Biechler, were connected, and they eventually had a suspect. It was reported by the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette that detectives had enough evidence in the Biechler case to indicate that she had been murdered by Roy Hensley, a former neighbor of her family. Hensley had previously died on January 28, 1994, in Aiken, SC, of heart and lung disease at the age of 75. Because the Biechler case was similar to that of the murder of April Tinsley, police suspected Hensley in both cases. "I think the same person killed both of them. There's too much similarities between the two cases. If they have enough evidence to say that Roy Hensley killed Sarah Biechler, then I believe Roy Hensley killed April Tinsley also," said Philip O'Shaughnessy, a former coroner. Hensley's son, David, and a woman who lived with Hensley for several years said the suspect knew both girls. David Hensley said his father carried photographs of the 2 slain girls in his wallet. Investigators first learned of Hensley in May 1992, when a relative came to police with suspicions that he might have been involved in the death of Sarah Jean Biechler. In several interviews, Hensley denied having anything to do with Biechler's slaying, and detectives could not corroborate the family member's suspicions. A relative of Hensley, however, told police that he had previously claimed to have killed Sarah and had urged the relative to keep quiet. Although authorities were unable to establish a connection between Hensley and the murder of April Tinsley, rumors persisted of his involvement. However, a link between these two cases had been disputed as early as August 7, 1991, when the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit determined that, although Tinsley and Biechler's cases were similar, they were ultimately unrelated. Over the following years, there was little in the way of new developments, and eventually the investigation became a cold case. For all intents and purposes, it appeared the killer of little April Tinsley had escaped justice. Over the next decade, the case of April Tinsley was almost forgotten, all apart from her family members and the dedicated investigators who worked so tirelessly on the case. Then, in 2004, it appeared the killer had emerged from obscurity to communicate with police once again. During the Memorial Day weekend, 4 notes were found in the Fort Wayne area that were believed to have been written by Tinsley's killer. 3 of these notes were left on girls' bicycles, and another one was left in a mailbox. The 3 notes left on girls' bicycles were placed in plastic bags, along with used condoms and Polaroid pictures of a man's lower body. One of these notes, littered with spelling and punctuation mistakes, read, "Hi honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped and raped and killed April Tinsley. You are my next victim. If you don't report this to police and if I don't see this in the paper tomorrow or on the local news, I will blow up your house, killing everyone but you. You will be mine." Another note read, "I am the same person who kidnapped and raped and murdered April Tinsley. You are next, haha." When forensic officers tested the condoms presumably left by the author, they discovered that the DNA matched the police's DNA profile of the suspect, meaning that the killer had left the notes. Despite this, there were no further developments in the case that led to the perpetrator's identity. In April 2009, The television program America's Most Wanted ran a segment on Tinsley's case and asked for tips from the public. That same year in June, Indiana authorities asked the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) Task Force Child Abduction Rapid Deployment (CARD) to help them solve the murder. In response, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit created a profile of the suspect, describing him as a preferential child sex offender, meaning he has a long-term and persistent sexual desire for children. The profile went on to describe the murderer as a white male, then in his 40s through 50s at the time of the crime, and living or working in northeast Fort Wayne, Allen County with a low to medium income. Police were unsure if the composite sketch made in 1988 of the suspect was of the killer. However, there were no other witnesses who came forward with a description of the suspect. In April 2015, construction started in the Hoagland-Masterson neighborhood of Fort Wayne on a memorial dedicated to April's memory. It was to be called April's Garden. 2 months later, in June 2015, the Virginia-based company Parabone released a snapshot composite sketch of the suspect based on information from his DNA. This new composite was significantly different from the previous sketch of the potential suspect. In early May 2016, police released an updated version of this sketch. That same year, the investigative series Crime Watch Daily aired an episode that featured the murder. With advent of forensic genealogy emerging as a new method of identifying suspects in cold cases, a Fort Wayne Police Department detective sent a sample of the suspect's DNA in May 2018 to the forensics company Parabone Nanolabs, which used the genealogy website GEDmatch to identify the suspect's relatives. On July 2, 2018, the genealogist Cease Moore narrowed down the list of suspects to 2 people. These 2 potential suspects were brothers, one of whom was 59-year-old John D. Miller, who resided in Graubill, Indiana, and whose neighbors described him as secluded and often angry. During a search of Miller's trash, police found used condoms and collected DNA that was later matched the suspect's DNA. On July 15, 2018, Fort Wayne detectives approached Miller at his residence and asked him to come to talk with them at the police station. On that same day, the Tinsley case was featured in an episode of On the Case with Paula Zahn, which aired just hours after an arrest was made in the case. At the station, officers advised Miller of his rights, and when asked if he knew why they wanted to talk to him, he replied, "April Tinsley." During a subsequent interview at the police station, Miller confessed to the murder, admitting to having abducted Tinsley, raping her and choking her to death in his trailer. He was charged with numerous charges, including murder, child molestation, and confinement. During a court hearing on July 19, 2018, Miller pleaded not guilty. On July 28, 2018, a memorial walk starting at April's Garden was held in honor of April Tinsley. On December 7, 2018, Miller changed his plea to guilty, admitting that he raped Tinsley and strangled her with his bare hands. As a result of his guilty plea, he was sentenced to 80 years in prison, the majority of which was for murder along with a 30-year sentence for child molestation. After sentencing, he was housed at the Indiana Department of Correction Reception Diagnostic Center in Plainfield. He was later moved to the New Castle Correctional Facility on January 16, 2019. Miller's earliest possible release date is scheduled for July 15, 2058, when he would be 99 years old. On October 26, 2018, the Indiana State Police honored 3 Fort Wayne investigators for helping authorities identify John D. Miller as a suspect in the Tinsley case. The family of April Tinsley were finally able to gain closure after 30 years of agonizing over who might have been responsible for the death of their young daughter. The only comfort they could now take is that John D. Miller can never again harm another child.